Hi there. Happy Sunday, June 23rd. Happy birthday, Paul Pascal. I know that's today now. Welcome everyone. I'll wait here for a minute till some people hop on. Hi, Katie, welcome. I'm about to tell the story of what happened on Thursday, so you can chime in. Yeah, I hope everyone has had a great week so far. We have had a really good week at the restaurant, with the exception of a little bit of an adventure on Thursday night. So we closed up at the restaurant on Thursday and went out to wine country to do a winemaker dinner at a winery at Flaneur, who we had on, when was that? 2 months ago now. Grant came on and talked to us about their wines. But we've been planning for it for months. We've been planning it since May. It was supposed to be in July, and then half of us got COVID. So then we had to postpone the dinner to August, and we sold it out. And we had almost 50 people, like 44 people, that were going to be sitting outside on a patio. And, Rosie is here. She heard my voice. And anyway, we thought we had planned for everything, and we had everyone at socially distanced tables, and we had everything out from the restaurant. And it was kind of hot, and we were worried that we wouldn't have enough shade for people. And then all guests showed up at once. No one got lost. Like, everyone was on time. And as soon as everyone sat down for dinner, the sky opened and it just started pouring rain. That was the one thing we had literally not planned on. And so we kind of figured it out. We had like half of the tables had umbrellas, and the other half we were like taking people inside and putting them in the tasting room, but we had to keep them distanced. And a bunch of people were like, oh, we'll just sit out in the rain because it'll stop in a second. And then it just kept raining harder and harder and harder. Katie, who's on here right now, stayed out the entire dinner. She was such a trooper. She won the endurance award. By the end of the meal, they were literally soaking wet and had like puddles in their plates and their wine glasses. But I hope everyone managed to have a good time. It was definitely an adventure. And we're like, it's definitely a sign of 2020 that having a fancy event get completely rained out is a positive alternative to everything else that's going on in your life. You're like, that sounds great compared to what else is happening in the world and compared to sitting in my living room. So it was a little bit of a journey. And if you were with us at Arden on Friday, I apologize because we were all just zombies. We were all so tired after that day. But it was fun, and we're glad to be back to normal. Hopefully everyone had weeks that weren't quite as eventful as that. What else is happening in life? Today we're going to talk about Alsace, which I'm really excited about. Has anyone been to Alsace out of curiosity? Thank you, Katie. Definitely an adventure, but super memorable. So much fun. Food and wine was fantastic. Well, I'm happy to hear it. I hope you got home and got dry and had some hot chocolate. Alsace is a fun region to talk about because it has a lot of influences from both France and Germany. It sort of reminds me of Catalan in that way. Gail, I'm not surprised. I was like, I bet Gail and Noma have been. Haven't been there yet. One day, hopefully. Yeah, it sort of reminds me of Catalan a little bit, where it's this interesting, like, not no man's land. It's like a culture in and of itself, but it's been heavily influenced from both the French and the German, whereas Catalan has been heavily influenced from both French and Spanish, and yet they still have their own language. So there's like 3 languages being spoken, and the food and everything is sort of like a mishmash of those different cultures. I actually went to Alsace literally for an afternoon. Yeah, architecture, that's one of the things I'm going to talk about. I was staying in Germany. I was visiting a friend in Freiburg, and we hopped over to Strasbourg and Colmar just for the afternoon. And it was beautiful. The architecture there, I don't know if you saw the picture I posted on Instagram, or if you just Google Alsace, it's the most darling architecture. Everything looks like gingerbread houses and the quintessential little, what I picture as like little German Bavarian towns with the half-timbered buildings and the tall steepled roofs because of the snow, because historically it's a cold region. And we'll talk about the climate a little later because it's sort of confusing for Alsace particularly. But when I went, it was Thanksgiving weekend actually, and it was covered in snow and freezing cold. So actually, let's jump in. Why not? 5 after, we got some people on here. I know you love my backwards maps, but just in case someone can't picture what we're talking about, this is France. So I get the reflection out of the way. I know you're looking at it backwards. So obviously this is Spain down here. And Alsace is this little turquoise area right over here. So this is Germany. And then this is Switzerland right below here. So Germany, Switzerland, and France kind of all come together right here. This area is Luxembourg right here, and kind of Germany wraps around. So you can see it's definitely at the outer edge, kind of the northeast corner of France. And we're going to talk about how many times it's gone back and forth between French and German hands. But just to give you a visual, you can kind of see where that is. This is Alsace. And then right here is a little area called Lorraine. So often they're grouped together. Lorraine is less known for wine, but often people will talk about Alsace-Lorraine as their own sort of territory. And just again, so I don't have to bring the map up again, so you have an idea of where most German wine regions are. So just opposite Alsace, this area down here is a German wine region. It's called the Baden. It's one of the slightly warmer German regions. And this river right here, running right next to Luxembourg, this is the Mosel River. So the Mosel Valley in Germany is actually right here. So it's further north than Alsace, and most of the rest of the German regions are kind of right over here. So Alsace isn't quite as far north latitudinally as most of Germany's wine regions, and definitely not quite as far as the Mosel. And if we're looking at it kind of in terms of latitude with other French regions, you know, this is Champagne right here. And then Chablis is this northernmost area of Burgundy. So Alsace is about on par with kind of Champagne, Chablis, which makes sense because we kind of think of it as a cooler region. So we'll talk up more about geography in a moment, but just to give you a brief history, I know you guys' favorite part, in terms of what has been going on with Alsace and why it has led to this interesting little, again, like confluence of both French and German influence, is that basically it's changed hands a lot of times historically. And also that's sort of interesting because we were talking about Emilia-Romagna last week, and we were talking about how Lambrusco vines were actually, they had been growing wild in that region since, you know, basically forever, before vines were actually cultivated. And we were talking about how we call, or they called wild vines Labrusque, which I don't know if that's Roman for, it basically means wild vines. And it turns out Alsace has the same things. And they also, instead of Labrusco, they're called Labrusque. And so Alsace is, I don't know how many regions in Europe. It'd be an interesting question for someone who knows European geology. How many regions actually had vines growing wild versus how many had to have them brought in and cultivated? But Alsace was one of the ones that they were growing wild. And so they actually have fossils from prehistoric times of like hunter and gatherers. They would eat the grapes. Obviously they wouldn't ferment them and vinify them, but they used the grapes as a food source. And so it wasn't until the Romans came in, Romans love wine, that they actually started vinifying the grapes for the first time. But the point is, grapes really like to grow in Alsace. So the Romans came in, started vinifying grapes around the year 0. I believe they actually started clearing forests and building vines. And the reason being that around the year 0, Emperor Augustus built the town of Strasbourg, which is, I don't think you can see. Oh yeah, I pull up this map one more time. It's the capital of Alsace is Strasbourg. It's sort of at the northern end. And so basically the region of Alsace was on the eastern edge, or I guess the northeastern edge of the Roman Empire. And so just on the other side of it was Germanic territories. And the Romans wanted a powerful outpost, sort of strategically placed right at the edge of their territories. And where they built Strasbourg was where the Rhine River is, which is still the divider between the two countries, and where they had a major road. So I think Strataburgi means like where the road and river meet. And that's where they built Strasbourg. And when they built that, they of course needed wine to drink. And so that's when they actually started clearing forest land and planting extra vines, as well as the ones that were already growing there. So that's what started the tradition of winemaking right around 0 AD. And then for the first time, the Germans took over, and that was around 350 AD. And at that time, they weren't called the Germans, they were called the Alemannians or the Alemanni. And if you've ever studied Spanish, that's actually their word for Germany is Alemania. And the language, the traditional language still spoken in Alsace is Alemannic. So there's still French spoken and German spoken, but Alemannic is sort of their traditional language. And it's kind of a old form of like High German or High Swiss. So anyway, then the Germans took over, and then the Franks took over, which eventually became Charlemagne's empire. So it went back to French hands. And then they split Charlemagne's empire, and it was still kind of in this border region between the German lands and the French lands. And then the 30 Years' War hit. Then we're in like the mid 1600s, and it was the French fighting the Habsburg Empire. And an interesting thing happened here, which is that the French essentially hired the Swiss army to fight a lot of the war for them. And they basically gave them Alsace as like the area to fight the war. So it got completely filled with Swiss army who were using it as a border region to fight the Germans. And here's a crazy statistic. I kind of had to reread this one. But the original population of Alsace during these 30 years of war diminished by 75%, which is pretty insane. And I think my understanding of it is that it was more from people just saying like, screw this, I don't want to live in a war zone. I'm going to find somewhere else to live rather than being killed in the war. That's my understanding of it. But point is, by 1648, when the war was over, all of the Alsatian people had kind of pieced out, and it was mainly resettled by the Swiss. And actually, Joseph Catan, the winemaker on our Gewürtztraminer today, that's when he's of Swiss descent, and that's when his family moved there. And I think it's actually the same for Leon Bosch, the other winemaker, because his family has been in Alsace since 1650, which seems like exactly when that happened. So that's sort of interesting. So then the Swiss influence came in. But the French won that war, so technically it was still under French rule, and then it switched back one more time, which was right before World War I, when Bismarck was unifying German territories, and and France essentially lost Alsace-Lorraine to Germany under Napoleon III. So at that point, it went back to German hands, and then with the end of World War I, it went back to France. So it's gone back and forth like 6 or 7 times, which makes sense as to then why it is what it is as a region. So it's sort of interesting. And it is interesting to think that it's only been officially a part of France most recently as 1918 with the end of World War I. And they did actually have 10 glorious days where they were their own republic, the Republic d'Alsace-Lorraine, which was right before they signed the Treaty of Versailles. So now they're back to being French. But the reason that I think they identify in a lot of ways more with the Germans is that you can't really tell from that map. And I'm going to try and do this so that it is not backwards for you. Oh God, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. I'm not going to be able to do the mirror thing. But basically, if Germany is here on this side, and this is the Rhine River, and so we have Germany here, and we have France here. I'm already realizing this is backwards. Point is, there's a mountain range called the Vosges Mountains. And on one side of the Vosges Mountains is the rest of France. And on the other side of the Vosges Mountains is just 15 miles to the Rhine River, and that's Alsace. So they're basically on the same side of the mountain range as Germany. So they're very isolated from the rest of France. Their climate is more similar to Germany. Their soil types are more similar to Germany. That's why they've inherited more food traditions, more grape varietals, because they're separated from the rest of France by this mountain range. So like we talked about the architecture, If you haven't seen pictures of Alsace, just Google, Colmar or Strasbourg. It's so adorable. Looks like Disneyland. And again, historically, it's a cold region because of this mountain range. So the Vosges Mountains kind of runs parallel to the Rhine River, and then Alsace is in between. And it's only about 15 miles apart. 15 miles wide, I suppose, and it runs north-south. So as you can imagine, at the foothills of a mountain next to a river, it's very fertile land. Just, you can kind of picture that from basic geography. And so it's always been an attractive piece of land for nomads and for settlers. And, that's why the Germans wanted to build, the Romans wanted to build that city there. It's areas like that where you get natural sort of runoff from the mountains, you're next to a river. It's just very fertile ground. And the mountains, as you can imagine, are cold. So it is a continental kind of cold climate. But an interesting thing happens geographically. Gail, you are absolutely right. Disneyland looks like Alsace and not the other way around. Thank you for correcting me on that. It's definitely where Disneyland is getting their inspiration. Everything's super colorful. There's beautiful flowers. It's so charming and adorable. But an interesting thing happens when sometimes if you're on one side of a mountain, which is something called a rain shadow effect. So basically all of the weather patterns that are blowing off, I guess it would be from the Atlantic Ocean. I'm not sure if it's coming that far. A lot of these weather patterns that are coming across France essentially get stopped at the Vosges Mountains. And so it means that hardly any moisture and hardly any clouds and hardly any rain gets past the mountain range. And because Alsace is on this side, it's actually a very sunny and very dry region. Almost like if you remember back to, hi Greg, welcome. If you remember talking about Mendoza a long time ago in Argentina, not that heavily, but it's not nearly as hot as Mendoza. But it's sort of the same thing where you're like in the foothills of this big mountain range. And it's a hot, even though it's kind of higher altitude, it's hot and it's dry. So even though Alsace is cold and snowy in the winter, it's actually in the high 70s, low 80s in the summer. And get this, it's actually drier than Provence. It's one of the driest regions in France, which is crazy to think about. And it's one of the only regions where both frost and drought are major concerns. And it's still kind of hard to wrap my brain around because you read the statistics and it's like, okay, it can be up to 80 degrees in the summer. And in the winter, it's like in the 40s. And it's not exceptionally high altitude where most of the vineyards are. They're like around 1,000 feet, like 600 to 1,200 feet, which isn't exceptionally high. And you're like, it kind of sounds like Oregon a little bit, the Willamette Valley, but it's just a different climate. Oregon is so wet, and it is a little bit lower, and Alsace is just very, very dry. So anyway, it means, for one thing, it means that it is still technically a cold climate based on where it is latitudinally, which means historically red grapes have been harder to ripen there. So traditionally it's white grapes, just like the rest of Germany. 90% of the wine grown there is white wine or white grapes, even though some of that is sparkling. We'll talk about that in a second. So lots of white wine. But then it also means that it's able as a region to ripen grapes that require longer growing seasons. And if anything comes to mind, it might be Riesling. Riesling is a notoriously difficult grape to ripen, which is why in Germany they have to plant it on steep river banks so they can get extra light bouncing off the river. But Alsace naturally has all that sun. So we're not tasting a Riesling today. And I didn't do that because we did Germany about a month ago and we tasted Riesling then, but you should, if you like the wines you taste today, or if you like German Riesling, you should definitely look up Alsatian Riesling. And it's the wines of Alsace are heavier and more muscular and kind of bigger in style than German whites because it has that sunny rain shadow effect. And it is, they take inspiration from both the French and the German. So they might use German German varietals, Riesling, Gewürztraminer, stuff like that. But they ferment them dry traditionally. So whereas Germany has a history of sweet winemaking, leaving a little bit of residual sugar in their Riesling, traditionally Alsace has always been fermented dry. So that's one way if you're in a blind tasting and you're looking to, if you're like, okay, I think it's Riesling, but would it be Germany or Alsace? Alsace is going to be drier with higher alcohol because of that sun. So your average German Riesling might be only 10%, depending on where it's from, whereas Alsace could be 13, even 14%. So anyway, just something to keep in mind. Let's talk briefly about the different varietals they grow there. We've already mentioned Riesling and Gewürztraminer, and there's 4 noble varietals, they call it, in Alsace. So Riesling, Gewürztraminer, and then Pinot Gris and Muscat. 2 grapes that are often not given a lot of respect, I would say, in the wine world. We kind of have a image, I feel like, of Pinot Gris because often it's mass produced and isn't the highest quality. And I would say Alsace is probably the region in the world where Pinot Gris is most well respected. And it's made for aging, and it can age 20 years and develops a lot of interesting characters. It gets these kind of like smoky undertones, so that's something worth looking up. And there's also other kind of lesser varietals. Chasselas, Auxerrois, Pinot Blanc is grown a lot, but those 4 sort of the 4 noble varietals. And there's the classification system in Alsace. It's interesting because it takes things from both France and Germany. What it takes from France is the AOC system, the Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, meaning, there's specific rules around how you can label the wine. So there's only 3 AOCs in Alsace. One is just Alsace AOC, which can be used for still white wines, either dry or sweet, rosés, and the little bit of red they produce. There's Cremant d'Alsace, which is sparkling wine, and that is delicious. It's some of the best Cremant in France. And then there's Alsace Grand Cru AOC. And the only 4 varietals allowed in the Grand Cru AOC are the 4 we just mentioned. Okay, so I think I've sort of talked your ear off. Have I skipped anything before we jump into taste? Well, and real quick before we taste these wines, one thing I should mention is that, Alsatian white wines are not necessarily like patio pounders like we've experienced with other wines. We're like, oh, this would be great just to sit by the pool and hang out. They're big wines. They're not necessarily what our palate might be familiar with. They're higher in alcohol, and it gives them more weight and more texture and more just like structure. They're like bigger whites, even though they have a lot of acidity and a lot of flavor. So they're great. They're great for food pairings. And the food of Alsace, because it's a mountainous climate, is not light food. It's not, southern Italy where it's like delicate jamon with melon and some, fresh arugula. It's like big sturdy meats and spätzle and casserole sort of things. One of the kind of the national dish of their country is called Backoff. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's basically a casserole, like a big dough-lined thing that has potatoes, vegetables, and then 3 different kinds of meats: beef, pork, and lamb, and then herbs and white wine. And, that's a heavy dish. And yet the pairing with it is these whites. They don't drink red wine really there. So it's an interesting kind of eye-opening region for people in terms of pairing, because they're eating hearty, meat-driven cuisine, but they're drinking white wines. And so I just wanted to mention that before we taste the white wine, because at first impulse, you might think it's like heavy. And I would just encourage you, if it maybe isn't your cup of tea right away, to like taste it with us and then hold off and eat it with some food afterwards, drink it with some food afterwards. Corey says we liked the Cremant d'Alsace rosé served at the wine dinner. Yeah. Do you know what grape they use for the Cremant? Yeah, so actually at the start of the wine dinner on Thursday, we needed just like a little sipper wine. So it was not made by Flaneur. And I used a Cremant d'Alsace, and it was actually from this producer of the Gewürtztraminer, Joseph Catan. And I believe, I actually don't know off the top of my head. I think it's a couple different white varietals, and then I think it's just a touch of Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is generally the only red varietal grown in Alsace. I could be a little bit out of date there, but so I expect it was probably like Riesling, a little bit of Chardonnay maybe. It could have had Auxerrois in there. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure, but I'll get back to you on that. But yeah, if you like sparkling wine, Cremant d'Alsace are fantastic. They're some of the best you can get because, as you saw from that map, they're right on level with Champagne. Okay, so let's taste some wine. So first up, we're going to taste the Edelzwicker. So what is an Edelzwicker? Edelzwicker, just a quick side note. When we were talking about the AOC systems, if you think of other French AOCs, like famous ones from the Loire Valley, from Burgundy, so what are some of those AOCs? Well, in Loire Valley, we have Sancerre, we have Chinon, we have Puy-Fumé. In Burgundy, we have Bourgogne Blanc, Bourgogne Rouge, Marsanne. In all of the names I said, did I say a grape varietal? No, I said the name of the region. So in most of France, in most of the AOC systems, in almost all of them, the AOC is named by the region rather than the varietal. Alsace is the only region in France where most of the wines are varietally labeled. Why is that? Because it's what Germany does, and because they're much closer in style to German wines in a lot of ways. So for instance, even though this is Alsace AOC, it says Gewürtztraminer on the label. Whereas nowhere in France would you see that happen. It would say, Alsace AOC, or it would say the name of the vineyard or the village, Colmar. But in Alsace, the AOC is the name of the varietal. So the exception to that is Edelzwicker. Edelzwicker is not a region. It's just a style. It literally translates as noble blend, I believe, or noble combination or something like that. So historically, it's the wine that winemakers would make, the only wine they would make as a blend. They would either do a single vineyard bottling of Gewürztraminer or Riesling or Pinot Gris or Pinot Blanc, or they would make an Edelzwicker. And it's sort of, it generally even is supposed to be non-vintage. This one is always single vintage. I believe it's 2018, but by law, Edelzwicker can't be bottled with a vintage on it. So it's kind of like their fun everyday winemakers like house blend. But it's such a unique thing to Alsace that I thought it'd be fun to try, because not a lot of places have written into their AOC like a blend. In Burgundy, there's Passé Grand, which is like a blend of Pinot Noir and Gamay. But this is one of the only other kind of like official names I've seen in an AOC that's made for a blend. So this Edelzwicker, let's pour it in the glass, and I can tell you what all the varietals are in it. I also thought it'd be fun because it's made up of sort of all of the main Alsatian varietals. So this one has 40% Pinot Blanc. It has 35% Sylvaner. It has 15% Riesling, 5% Pinot Gris, 3% Muscat, and 2% Gewürztraminer. And so if you'll notice, 75% of it is Pinot Blanc and Sylvaner. And since we're tasting a Gewürztraminer, which is so aromatic, I thought it would be nice to do a wine that is a little more subdued on the aromatics and a little bit brighter. So let's put it in the glass and look at it. Tell me what you guys think of the color and the legs. I haven't swirled mine. I actually don't know what the alcohol is on this. 12.5% alcohol, which makes sense because legs are forming. you know, not overly slowly, not overly quickly, kind of just about average. A little bit slow to form, but then once they get going, they're moving fairly fast. Yep, Abby, I would agree with you there. Fast legs. And the color, tell me what you guys think about the color. My paper today is yellow, so I don't think it's going to be helpful to put that behind my glass. Yeah, that's a really good note. It does have like a subtle greenness in the color itself. So if we're detecting like a little bit of green notes as opposed to, you know, more yellow or orange notes even, or tawny notes, it probably means that it's definitely not oxidized, and it definitely probably isn't, it doesn't have a lot of age to it, which makes sense because Edelzwicker is sort of like a young, fresh blend. And this one, I think it's 2018. It doesn't say it on the bottle, and I don't have my little sheet. It says it on your sheet. Yeah, pale blonde color. That's a good way to say it. Yeah, sort of like a straw yellow, slight green notes to it. Okay, let's smell it. Tell me what you guys think on the nose. It's definitely still aromatic, but you know, Pinot Blanc and Sylvaner aren't as aromatic as like Riesling and Gewürtztraminer. Yeah, so tell me what you guys, Sarah, welcome. Tell me what you guys are detecting on the nose. I would say, 2018, stamped on the cork. Thank you, Noma. That's why I keep you around. Yeah, floral for sure. So you definitely get those stone fruits that are a big part of Riesling's nose. But I would say the floral notes play an equally big component. And that makes sense because Pinot Blanc, you know, one of the famous smelling notes on Pinot Blanc is like white flowers, jasmine, pear on the nose. That's a great note. Yeah, pear, maybe like golden apple. I even smell a little bit of like honeydew, not like ripe cantaloupe, but this kind of like underripe melony sort of thing. I don't know if you guys get that. Maybe even like just a touch of like honeysuckle. And tell me if you agree with me, but the fruit doesn't smell, it smells ripe, but it doesn't smell like overly ripe. It smells like still very fresh and very bright. Okay, so let's taste it. Maybe some quince, absolutely. You guys are getting so professional. Maybe some quince, fruity, but slightly astringent on the nose. Yeah, I could see that. You might be picking up the alcohol. I mean, again, it's not super high alcohol. I believe the Gewürztraminer is a little bit higher. Honeysuckle, yeah, you guys are getting very good. Next time we do a blind tasting in September, everyone's gonna be spot on. I'm gonna have to throw you a curveball. Okay, so tell me what you guys think. Ooh, what do you get about the acidity? Like, there's a lot of acidity in here. I forgot how much of acidity is in this wine. It's funny because when I first put it in my mouth, I almost thought it was going to be sweet. I don't know if you guys had that same sensation. Like the oiliness, as soon as it hits your tongue, made me think of like something that was syrupy. And I was like, oh, it's going to be sweet and syrupy. But then the acidity comes in and just kind of like braces your mouth. And the acidity just kind of comes pouring in. Yeah. And that's the thing about Alsatian wines is that, man, my mouth is just like watering out of control. You get this lovely ripe fruit because you get these hot, sunny temperatures. But because it's high up in the mountains, you know, and because it is a cold, you know, it gets very cold at night. That's the other thing. It may be sunny during the day, like when the sun is there, but when the sun is not there, it's still very high latitude in the foothills of the mountains, and it gets very cold at night. Abby likes it the more she drinks it. That's the best kind of wine. But you can see how maybe you want this with some food because yes, I love acid. But I know like I have a high tolerance for acidity in wine, and for other people, it might be like a little bit too intense and you sort of need something rich to balance it out. Yeah. And Kyle agrees. It did taste quite sweet to me at first. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that has to do with the weight of the wine itself. because the grapes that are in here are, you know, there is Riesling, there is Gewürztraminer, and those naturally are more fuller bodied varietals that do have more oily texture, and the fruit, you know, smells sweet, it gets riper. And so you taste it and you're like, is this going to be sweet? And then that acidity just comes straight in. So what are some other Alsatian dishes? I mean, tell me what you guys would pair with this. I wrote down some classic dishes of Alsace. One of them is sauerkraut. I actually put some little sauerkraut in a bowl that I was going to taste with the Gewürztraminer. But maybe I'll taste it with the Edelzwicker as well. Because sauerkraut is like the national food of Alsace. They call it choucroute, but it basically means sauerkraut. And it's very good together. They play a lot with sweet and sour in Alsace. So obviously we have the kind of even sweet and sour just in the wine glass itself. That's kind of what we were just describing. Is it sweet or is it tart? And so sauerkraut kind of plays with the same flavors. We're eating Chev cheese that has mango chunks in it. Ooh, I could see that. Tell me how that is, because Chev does have a natural sourness to it as well. And the mango is probably going to give it some sweetness. Yeah, sausage, absolutely. Do you eat the Beyond Meat sausage? He says he's eating vegan sausage. I'm obsessed with the Beyond Meat sausages. The bratwurst and the spicy ones. If you like sausage but you don't eat meat, they are excellent. So if you have those with some sauerkraut and some Edelzwicker or Gewürztraminer, yeah, that's a classic pairing there. So obviously that's a big part of their cuisine, just like in Germany. Let's see, what else did I write down for their food? I mean, they do a lot of meats and they do like heavy cream pastas. Tarte flambe is another popular dish there, which is basically like an Alsatian pizza with white sauce. So it has like heavy cream and fromage blanc, and then it just has onions and bacon on top of it. So again, like creamy pork, rich, and then you need something with that high acid to just cut straight through it. Kyle, yep, they're the best sausages. Yeah, the wine has a bit of a sour taste to it, unlike its smell. Yeah, that's that acidity. You know, it smells like it's going to be sweet, and then it has a whole lot of acid in there. Hi, Devin, welcome. So yeah, any other thoughts on the Edelzwicker before we move to the Gewürztraminer? The cheese pairs well because the fruitiness, awesome, that goat cheese with mango. Munster cheese, did I write that down correctly? Yeah, Munster cheese is from Alsace, unless it's another M cheese. I think it's Munster, which is kind of stinky cheese. And that pairs really well with these wines. So any of those like heavy, kind of stinky, even like Swiss style cheeses are great pairings with these whites. So let's taste. I'm gonna pour out my Edelzwicker in my coffee cup. And let's jump to the Gewürztraminer. So before we taste the Gewürztraminer, just a quick little historical background on Gewürztraminer as a grape, because it is a very divisive grape. And I guarantee you, even when we drink it right now, some of you are going to be like, I hate this. But I would encourage you to give it a chance. It is, I think, if not one of the most aromatic varietals. Gewürz means spices, and Traminer is a town in northern Italy. So Gewürztraminer, so it means the spices of Traminer. And so it's a grape varietal that's native to that little town, to that region in what is now northern Italy. But again, it used to be part of this Germanic territory. And if you look at it, I don't have a map pulled up, but they're really not that far apart. You know, if Alsace is right here, and the German border goes down, and Switzerland is right there, this is the area in Italy that's just right here. It's just the very top of Italy, basically in the foothills of the Alps. And that's where Gewürztraminer is native to. And it's what is now Alto Adige, but back in the day they called it Südtirol. So again, it used to be a German territory that's now in Italy, kind of the opposite of Alsace. So that's where Gewürztraminer is native, but it's definitely found a home in Alsace. And people really prize it, again, because it can stand up to food. It's a big white varietal, a lot like Riesling. It doesn't have as naturally high of acidity as Riesling, which is why it can sometimes get a bad rep. Because if you grow it in a place that is not, doesn't have cold enough nights, you get a big bodied white that doesn't have quite enough acidity. And because it's so aromatic, it can feel a little like flubby and like intense. Like smell sweet, a little too much, but no acid to kind of balance it out. Which is why it does really well in Alsace or in Alto Adige, because they're both cold climates. The Gewürztraminers that come from Alsace, as you can imagine, are going to be a little bit higher alcohol, again, because of that rain shadow, because they get so much more sun. But again, just keep that in mind. Well, let's taste it and see what you guys think. So you might notice a little something with the legs on this one as we swirl it. Whoops, don't spill it on my computer. Okay, so color, tell me what you guys see about the color. It's similar in color to the Edelzwicker. Still that kind of straw yellow, maybe a little bit less of the green tint, hint of it, but a little more of that true straw yellow. And what do you guys know about the legs? Mine are moving more slowly. I don't know about yours. They're moving, but they're moving slower than the Edelzwicker were, which makes sense because this is 14.2% alcohol, which means it could even be a little higher. It could be like 14.5. Yeah, you guys are spot on. Thick legs and a little more yellow. I don't even know why I'm here. Okay, so we can already guess it's probably going to be a little bit higher alcohol and heavier bodied. So let's smell it and tell me what you guys smell. Has a very unique smell, Gewürztraminer. I mean, it kind of smells like spices. Go figure. Like you for sure get the floral notes, but you also get, and you definitely get a little bit of the like stone fruit, like peach, apple, but then you do get these kind of like spicy, like exotic smells. I don't know if you guys agree. Maybe ginger. I've heard people say saffron, along with like the rose petal, the jasmine. When Gewürztraminer ages and the fruit fades off a little bit, it gets this really interesting, almost like bacon fat note to it too, which is kind of cool if you've ever had old Gewürztraminer. It's just a fun wine to pair food with. Again, it's probably not a wine you want to like just sip on its own, but it's complex and has a lot going on. I'm interested to hear if you guys are getting any extra notes on the nose, because I don't want to just make them all up for you. I couldn't name it, but saffron, yes. Yeah, that's sort of like if you've ever, I mean, saffron is a big spice in Spanish cooking. If you've smelled it in paella, that like yellow kind of spicy smell. It almost has that like, saffron to me always has like a kind of iodine type of smell. Some people will say ginger. I've heard people say cardamom. Along with like nectarine, peach, flowers. Like there's a lot of smells going on in here. So let's taste it and tell me what you guys think. And it says banana and bubblegum. I could see a little bit of banana in there. Maybe a little bit from that fruitiness of bubblegum too. Jasmine on the nose. Yep. So tell me what you guys think about this on the palate. And I believe, because you might pick it up, I believe there's 4 grams residual sugar in this. So just a little bit, not a whole lot. Which actually is traditional in Alsace. People will sometimes leave Gewürztraminer just like a hair of residual sugar. Not sweet, but just a little bit. Because it kind of goes well, I guess, with all those aromatics. Honey, yeah, absolutely. A very different taste than the smell. Sweeter and tastes like banana bread. Yeah, I mean, it has a lot going on. The acidity, I don't know if you guys would agree, the acidity is definitely not quite as high as the Edelzwicker. There's good acidity there, and you know, it's present. I think it's balanced, but it's not quite as high as the Edelzwicker. Yeah, less acidic, warming spices type flavor. Yep, I would agree with that. My first instinct is, whoa, sweet, but after a couple tastes, it's actually not super sweet. It's oily, I feel like. Yeah, again, that's kind of one of it's like this perceived sweetness thing that comes along with some of these Alsatian varietals, because they have that oily body and they're higher in alcohol and they have that really aromatic, sweet smelling nose. So you smell them and then you taste them and you feel that richness and you're like, oh my God, it's sweet. But then you realize it's not really, and there's a good amount of acidity to kind of dry it up. But this definitely is just a little bit sweeter than the Edelzwicker, which is bone dry. Banana bread with cinnamon in it. Yeah, apple pie. Rosie, what are you just wiggling around down here? Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't really talk about how either of these wines were made. They don't use a lot of oak in Alsace. They'll use large neutral barrels and they'll use stainless steel. But they don't really use a lot of new oak. Noma's like, what would they pair it well with? I know this is not your usual type of wine, Noma. Foie gras is a classic pairing with Gewürtztraminer. Feel like it has a minty cooking effect. Getting more bitter flavor in the background as I keep drinking. Interesting. Wondering if that's like the acidity you're picking up or more of like a tannic sensation. A minty cooling effect. Yeah, I sort of see that little bit of, it's not like it smells minty, but it has that like, that feel of like a clean minty taste in your mouth. And again, this is why Gewürztraminer, people are sort of fascinated and freaked out by it, because it has so much going on, but it has to be like done well in the right hands. Otherwise it's sort of a mess. It can be sort of a mess. And if you don't get enough acidity in there, it can taste really syrupy and just like confusing to your palate. Because I don't use oak, is that why the color is lighter as well? Or is that just the age of the grape? So that's a good question. It's both. So if they had used newer oak, this is they ferment it in stainless steel and then they put it in large, very, very neutral oak barrels, which is kind of traditional for Alsace to age it just for a little bit before they bottle it. And this particular one also sits on the lees, which is why some of you guys were saying banana bread. There's a little bit of yeastiness in there because it did rest on the lees or the dead yeast cells. So it gave it a little bit more of that richness. And the age of the grapes also does play into it. So if you had an older Gewürztraminer, it would probably be a little bit darker in color. Hopefully, just more from natural aging and not from major oxidation. The oily character, Kyle, is just in the grape itself. It's like saying, why is Cabernet Sauvignon heavier than Pinot Noir? It's just intrinsic to the style of the varietal. Riesling is sort of in the same boat. They're not genetically related, but they have a lot, I don't think, but they have a lot of similarities in that way. It's just different than, Sauvignon Blanc. Chardonnay naturally has a heavier body than, Pinot Blanc even, or what's another, maybe Albarino or something like that. But it's just in the style of the grape itself. I should have said both of these, the Edelzwicker and the Gewürztraminer, are all wild fermentation, so native yeast, no commercial yeast added, and both of them are nothing added until a little bit of sulfur at bottling. So again, my style of natural wines being that there's no gunk in it, but they just do a little preservatives at the end. The Edelzwicker is 100% biodynamically farmed, and the Gewürztraminer is sustainably farmed. And Noma, I just wanted, because I feel like I threw out foie gras, but I didn't quite give you other ideas. Again, Gewürztraminer, because of that oily texture and because of the acidity, like potatoes and pork with a white sauce is a classic pairing for Gewürztraminer. Because it can stand up. Gewürztraminer is a white wine that can stand up to pork, which is sort of the traditional meat of the region, and even, to beef in like these casserole type forms, or poultry for sure. One of the traditional dishes there, rather than just coq au vin, it's coq au Riesling. So chicken like cooked in Riesling. And you could pair Gewürztraminer with that. You can kind of use it as a red wine in terms of pairing it with meat, but I would just instead of having like tomato-based sauces or like, something super astringent, they use more like creamy white sauces. That tarte flambe is a great pairing with Gewürtztraminer, which is like basically a white sauce pizza with bacon and onions. Get something like that from Pizzicato and tell me what you think. Odd comparison, but this seems as unique as a white as the Lambrusco last week was a red. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like Lambrusco might be a little bit crazier just because it's a cold, sparkling red. But you're right. Whereas that is sort of like a red grape that's used as like a white one in that sense. This is sort of like a white grape that's used as a red almost. And again, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, so I'm not going to be offended if people weren't crazy about the Gewürztraminer. But I would encourage you, before you write it off, go buy a thing of sauerkraut and some sausages, or get a pizza, get a white sauce pizza, and tell me what you think. Or just get some foie gras, and tell me what you think about that. Gewürztraminer with foie gras is pretty delicious. And Anna really likes it. That's awesome. I know I always hark back on this restaurant where I worked in LA, but when I worked at this Southeast Asian restaurant in LA, we cooked with a lot of spice and a lot of fresh herbs and a lot of like crazy, Thai basil and lemongrass, and it was very hard to pair wine with, and Gewürztraminer was a go-to. Gewürztraminer and Riesling, but Gewürztraminer was even almost a better pairing because it has all of these kind of spice notes to it. It can go really well with like a spicy Thai curry. It's one of the, if you look up like wines to pair with spicy food, Gewürztraminer is always at the top of the list. So that would be another thing to try, is like get some Thai takeout and try it with that. It's a fun one to experiment, fun one to pair with. Maybe you're not going to choose it to like just pour for your next cocktail party as people mill around. But if you want to have a wine pairing, if you want to go to Long Bon and like bring a fancy bottle of wine, bring like an aged Gewürztraminer and see how it goes. It tasted so good with Trader Joe's dark chocolate peanut butter cups. Not sure that's legit, but I liked it. I mean, that is good to know. And those things are very good. So that is a fun tasting. And Abby is drinking our wines today for the first time because she was here in Portland and I gave her some. Yay! Rather than having to get the comparable set in Austin. So yay. What else on Alsace? Oh, if you want to see the cutest winery of all time, just look up Leon Bosch. Here's his name down here. It is the most darling winery. It's fully biodynamic. And so they kind of like we talked about with the Albana last week from Emilia Romagna. They have flora and fauna all over the winery. They plant herbs and flowers and all of this stuff in between the vines. But the winery looks like a traditional Alsatian building. It's like has the cross timber and the steepled roof, and that's the winery itself. And on the logo here on the door is the logo on the label is a thatched straw door, which is a traditional technique that they made doors with from like the 1600s. That's just done in Alsace, and so it's like a nod to their history. But it is freaking adorable. They have pictures of baby deer, and just it's super cute. It made me happy, and it made me want to like go work a harvest there. Corey says, Gewürztraminer, Washington. Oh, that's a good thing to know, is that Washington grows a lot of Gewürztraminer. We didn't even talk about that. Washington Gewürztraminer has always seemed like unsophisticated flower bombs to me. It's a fair point. Are they worth aging to get that oxidation effect, or should we stick with better regions for aging? Well, first thing I would say is that when you age Gewürztraminer or Riesling, you're not really going for that oxidation effect. You don't really want it to be oxidized. When a wine gets oxidized, the impact of the oxygen basically diminishes like the floral, the natural aromas, like all those pretty flower and peach and spices. Those go away in favor of just like a nutty smell, like the sherry that we drank. That's what oxidation smells like. So when you age a Gewürztraminer, you don't really want oxidation. You want there to be an environment where just a little bit of oxygen can come in to help the wine mature. And maybe it's less bright and floral. And generally it would be less floral, less peachy, and it would be more spicy. It would be a little bit waxier, and that saffron and that ginger and maybe that like chamomile would come out a little bit more. So it would get more complex and less fruity, but you wouldn't really want it to be nutty because that would detract from how effusive and like elegant the smells in the Gewürztraminer are. But to your second question about Washington Gewürztraminer, yes, Gewürztraminer was one of the original plantings in the Columbia Gorge, and a lot of people still plant it there. And you're right, I have had some that is not that great, and I've had some that's really good as well, actually. If it's grown on those high slopes up in the Columbia Gorge, it almost mimics what happens in Alsace, where it gets a lot of sun, but it's on high, steep slopes. The Gewürztraminer that comes from Edelzwicker Vineyard, I think Edelzwicker is the original. Edelzwicker and Oak Ridge, Oak Knoll are like the two original Gewürztraminer vineyards. And Analema, I always talk about Analema. They make a really, really good Gewürztraminer. It's okay, Kyle. We thought you were just mocking, Washington Gewürztraminer. It's cool. Analema makes a really excellent Gewürztraminer. As to the ageability, I don't exactly know how it would age. Alsace has that, you have to have enough acidity and you have to have ripe enough fruit. And if it's not high, if you only maybe get to 12% alcohol and the acidity isn't high enough, it's not going to age really well. The fact that they can get to 14% and have high acid is what gives it ageability. So try out some Washington Gewürztraminer, get a bottle of Analema and tell me what you think. The pet nat of Gewürztraminer. That's right. This is the second Gewürztraminer we had. We had that pet nat from Montebruno. I'm forgetting what we have done. Yes, that is a really good example of like solid Gewürztraminer. And again, I think he kind of heightens the freshness and the acidity by doing it in a pet nat bubbly style to kind of balance out the heaviness. So yes, these are all great examples. So yeah, try some Gewürztraminer from other places and tell me what you think. I would just want to make sure that as long as it has good acidity, that's sort of my requirement. What to tell you, because we have a couple minutes left, 3 minutes left. We are not going to be here next week. I am going to take the first week off since March. It is crazy to think we have done one of these every single Sunday since March. And there's 5 weeks in August this month, so I'm taking the week off. I'm going to get out of town for a couple of days, and then I'll be back on, I think it's like September 6th, I want to say. And so here's the other thing. We're going to start on Saturdays. And I really hope that just doesn't mean that if some of you, if it doesn't work for you, I really apologize. I mentioned this last week, and I didn't have anyone reach out and say they couldn't do Saturdays. And selfishly, I just really want 2 full days off. And because the restaurant is closed Sunday, Mondays, it sort of means I can't do anything on Sunday. And so I'm just being selfish and I'm switching it to Saturdays. And I know a lot of you are watching it after the fact now. So I hope that that's okay. For those of you that do watch it live, I hope you can join us at least sometimes. And I hope it totally doesn't disrupt the schedule. And if it does, I apologize. I feel these 2 glasses more than most weeks. That's one way to tell higher alcohol content. I kind of agree, Kyle. My cheeks are a little bit warm. Thank you, Anna. I will enjoy the week off. Thank you guys so much. You guys are the best. And hopefully I can help make your Saturdays a little more fun now. You guys are great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Self-care isn't selfish. I love you guys. I need to run all my decisions past you. Okay. So have a great week as well. And I realize the week we get back is Labor Day. So again, if you can't watch it live, it's saved on Instagram. I'm even going to start doing them on YouTube because I want someone to give me like a travel TV show, just putting that out into the universe so that I could do these like from Alsace, because that'd be sweet. I believe they're going to be the same time on Saturdays on 3 o'clock. because I need to do them before 5, which is when we start dinner service. So that's the plan. I'm going to officially announce the lineup in the next couple days. And let me know if you have feedback. Let me know if you have ideas. But it's going to be 2 regions, a blind tasting, and then 1 more on winemaking technique, tasting some wines around technique. Okay, I'm getting kicked off. Oh, and Carol. So that's the official schedule will be out soon. Okay, bye. Have a great day.